6 o'clock on January 31st, 2023. This meeting of the Hingham Select Board is called to order. Want to note for the record, this meeting is being offered remotely as an alternate means of public access pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022 and all other applicable laws temporarily amending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. If anyone has recorded this meeting, please notify me at this time. Seeing none, next item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. For those willing, please stand and face the flag of our nation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I also want to note for the record that participating in tonight's meeting are myself, William Ramsey, Chair, Board Member Liz Klein, and Board Member Joe Fisher. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Joe, you ready to proceed?
I am.
Liz, you ready to proceed?
Yes.
With that, I'd take a motion.
I move to approve the minutes dated January 24th, 2023.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call, Joe?
Aye.
Liz?
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. The motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda is to consider the agreement with Williamson Electrical Company Incorporated, doing business as Williamson Pump and Motor for emergency pump station repairs at the Broad Cove Sewer Pump Station. We have Matt Cahill from the DPW here, as well as Kathy Riley. So Matt, why don't you walk us through your request this evening?
How are you today?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. So we had a failure with our main pump recently, and we've been working off one pump from the station. At Broad Cove, yeah. Sorry, I didn't know I had to wear my hat.
You look great. You look great. Go ahead.
No, we're going to bring the makeup on.
But so, we've been trying to maintain flow since Broad Cove's our largest station. It handles about 1.1 million gallons a day. Once I was made aware of the situation, I came directly to Tom and Michelle, brought to their attention, and started the emergency packet based off of what we saw and the lead times that we were being given from our vendors. So we're just trying to do everything we can to keep the station up and running.
Kathy, anything to add?
Just that we were in an emergency situation. You have to request a waiver from DCAM at the state level. And we did that, and we were almost immediately approved, so.
We do have Clark Frazier from the Sewer Commission here tonight. Clark, do you want to add anything to the presentation?
Yes.
If you could just state your name and address for the record.
Yeah. Clark Frazier, 50 Bonnie Briar Circle, Hingham. And I wanted to preface this by saying that the Sewer Commission has some statutory responsibilities which are fairly significant, particularly in this case, because the consequences of having only one pump now at the pumping station are serious. And also, I didn't find out about this until yesterday when I looked at the agenda for the select board meeting, which I got from the clerk's office by email. That kind of a lapse, I hope, doesn't happen again, that the sewer commissioner should be notified. Also, I'm concerned that their sewer superintendent, Steve Dempsey, is not here. He may be able to answer questions that cannot be otherwise answered. So the question is, how do we get here? We should have 3 pumps in the pumping station, as I understand it. We only have now 1 operational. I don't know. There's 1 other pump that's not in operation that I understand has been out of service for many years. And I was not aware of it. I've checked. The chair of the Sewer Commission wasn't aware of it either. He's been on for a while. So the approval of the emergency funding, I think, should go forward, but I also think it needs to be ratified by the Sewer Commission. I don't know, the lawyers can tell us for sure what that is. Now, question I have, this is emergency funding, which if we don't do anything else is gonna go on to next year's rates. So what I'm asking the question is really of council and all that, is we have an old bond issue in 2017 that may not have been fully used because a lot of the work was never done, and then which was pertinent to that area. And then we also have a proposed bond issue coming in front of town meeting, and whether we could add the money to pay for this plus other things associated with it in that bond issue, so we don't have to hit up the rates. And maybe it turns out it may work that it could go on the sewer rate, but I'm not sure it can, given all the other inflation. I mean, we could be looking, this could add 12 to 15% to the sewer rate, plus inflation may add another equivalent amount, and to get a 20 or 30% increase in the rate, I think would not be good. So I talked to the town engineer, and they have a plan. One thing that I asked is that we have an emergency plan, because if the other pump fails, we have no pumping capability, and that's most of the North District. Now, what that means is, and this is thanks to JR helping me through this, we'd have to truck the wastewater to from the various pumping stations, shut them down, truck the wastewater, and that water would have to go in to the gravity main at Shipyard Drive from there to the pumping station. We'd also have to get a 24/7 construction crew out to dig a hole near the pumping station so that we could install an emergency rental pump. I assume they're available. And that could take 3 days, it could take longer. So the only thing I can add to it is that because we have pending work to replace the force main on 3A, we're gonna have to dig up there anyway. That we try to add that to the bond issue, this bond issue, and go ahead and dig that hole and get that access point in place. Because if that other pump fails, then if the engineer agrees, it may take less time to get another pump in there. So I'd like to do everything we can to mitigate this. Keep in mind that Quincy right now is paying fines of like $50,000 a day for what they're doing. I don't want to get into that. Even $5,000 a day would not be good. So that's really the only other thing I can suggest is that we aggressively go after infiltration and inflow, and that is water that does not belong in the system. We have a lot of leaks. If we can find any of them and get them fixed during this period, that would help. The other last thing is, and we already brought it up in a meeting, is that the sewer department be tied into the reverse 911 system that's being set up by the water company. Because if something like this happens, or some other failure like that, we need to notify people and ask them to reduce their use of water. So that's what I know, or what I found out. So I don't know. Matt, do you have anything you can add to that?
I mean, your assessment of the situation is correct.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Your assessment of the situation is correct.
Is what?
Is correct, that
Yeah.
if pump
Okay.
one fails, we will have to dig a hole.
Yeah, you're gonna have to dig a hole, and you're gonna have to do it
65
quickly.
pounds.
And I figured it would take maybe 10 trucks shuttling 24/7 to move the wastewater while we're not doing that.
Based on my conversations with our consultant, we wouldn't be able to keep up.
You would
during
not
the-
be able to
We
do
would not be
it?
able to keep up during the day. We might be able to keep up at night, but most likely we'd still.
Okay, so we'd have to cut usage back in order to make that work at all. And if we can't, then water will come out there and it could impact the Foster School, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions?
Bill Clark, thanks for being here tonight, and appreciate your comments. I'm gonna take board questions, then I'll go to you. Kirk, I see you up there, and I see JR too. Let me take some board questions first, and we'll go to you as a commissioner, Kirk, all right? So I guess my first question is, Matt, so you said we have 2 pumps there, and one has failed, is that the situation?
So historically, the stations run on 2 pumps.
2 pumps, okay.
And the main pump, one of those main pumps failed. And so currently, the station's running on a singular pump, which is just, it's not good practice. It's not good for the pump.
Right,
It's not good for the station. The pump's already starting to show some wear and tear, visible wear and tear, just from it being on 24/7, essentially, trying to keep up with everything.
Is that pump in good condition, though? I mean, obviously, it's going.
So the pump's 3 years
Rookie
old.
double, yeah.
Randy had it rebuilt, I believe 3 years ago. And so as part of that, that was probably one of the biggest saving graces with the first failure, is that the pumps were rebuilt at the same time. So we still have a good pump right now. Or we have a reliable pump for the time being.
If we vote to approve this tonight, how quickly can we get this other pump up there and up and running?
I think part of the emergency was that the backlog is like 4 months at the minimum to receive the pump. And we tried to find different brands or different vendors, and it's just really a supply issue.
Okay, so obviously the need is pretty pressing here. As Clark pointed out, we don't want a pump failure. That would be difficult to handle. So, okay, Joe, do you have any questions?
Yeah, so just to follow up on Bill's question, so the contract says no later than June 30th is when we'd expect delivery. Is that your understanding? Is that the outside date or the?
We're hoping
soonest?
that's the outside date.
And what assurances do we have from the company that they can deliver on that? Is it a contract? Is it?
The contractor, I think, will do it as soon as we get it. It's really just physically receiving the pump itself. So that's what they had said, between 4 and 5 months.
I mean-
So we put June as a true outlier of when the contract should be finished. But the ideal would be that it comes, in 120 days or, and then the vendor will, I'm sure, jump right on it after that. We've done business with them before with our pumps.
And that's the whole point, is that we did take a time we talked with Russ from the water company, utilized all facets that we could to try to find something that was available. And in the conversations I had with Williamson, in the situation, they understand it's dire on our end, and is doing everything they can to support us.
Yeah, so you've anticipated my next question, is what's our experience with this vendor? And
They are one of the more reputable vendors that we deal with, and they've worked very well with the sewer department and the sewer supervisor. And so I'm very happy that this is the way we're going. This is kind of probably the best case situation for us. They've helped us out in the past. They know the station. They know our problems and our issues that we've had. So when it comes to a company to fix it, they're the best for us.
is there anything more that the town can do to expedite the process?
Outside of finding a couple little gnomes to make it ourselves or something, I
Some
know.
elves, but in other
Some
words,
elves from
Connections of-
Christmas left over.
reaching out to the state or other neighboring towns, or are there?
I don't know that the state, I guess, reaching out to other towns or
Based off-
MWRA or something like
yeah.
that, I'm not sure.
Based off of everyone we talked to, we're stuck. I made a lot of phone calls. I know Russ made a lot of phone calls. I know Steve made a lot of phone calls. We're not the only town that's in this situation right now, where pumps are a problem to get. And that's something Randy, I guess, has been trying to address in a more strategic fashion, where he's trying to bring a more congruent fit to the system overall by trying to get it so the pumps are the same size, the pumps are the same horsepower. That way we can start shelving pumps, and when an issue like this occurs, we're much more versatile. But it's a work in progress. We're getting there with it.
Do you have a sense of the difference, if there is any difference, in the price that we're paying on this contract versus had we gone through the normal process?
We got the quote before we knew it was gonna be an emergency quote. So there's no way of knowing really what it would be, but I think that the cost of the pump is what it would, in the ballpark. They didn't mark it up a lot
Okay, so this-
because it was an emergency or anything.
Okay,
And they're also on state contract too, so they're a vetted vendor. But I don't think that it was inflated due to the emergency,
Okay.
because we really did address it. We talked about going out to bid, actually,
Yeah.
before that, so.
Okay, that's very good news. The warranty that's associated with this new pump is consistent with what you'd expect?
I think so. I
Yeah.
don't remember specifically. I wanna
It's the
say
standard
10 years.
manufacturer warranty that they give and provide with the normal startup and run phase
Okay.
when the pump goes into initiation.
And so currently, we're now using one pump.
Yes.
And assuming that nothing goes wrong with that one pump, does it have the capability to deal with what's being put out?
We're maintaining.
I'm sorry?
We're maintaining right now.
Okay.
It's holding up. The rains that we just saw last week, we were flooded most of the week, but we were able to maintain. And so, in that sense, we've talked to the consultant and with the sewer supervisor and have a plan if we start seeing an issue of how we would deal with it on an emergency basis immediately to try to reduce that.
Got it. No other questions? Thank you.
Liz, any questions?
Oh, thank you, Joe, and Bill, and thank you for explaining the process. I was gonna ask about the bid process, but I understand that with the emergency situation, kind of how this went. Have there been any disruptions to service yet?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
The station's been inundated, it's been flooded, but we've kept it within the station.
Okay. Okay. And do you have a way of communicating with customers?
So the DEP sets a guideline and process that we're required to follow if we have an issue.
Okay.
And that's for any sewer break, and that's the process that we'd follow.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna turn to public comment now. I do note that we do have another sewer commissioner participating remote.
Do you mind if I just jump in just for a second? I know Kirk has some comments I think it looks like he wants to make there. I don't think you guys are posted, are you?
We're not voting,
Right.
we would have called a meeting, that's the other thing I was gonna say, we would have had a
Quorum.
simultaneous meeting if we'd known.
No, understood, but I don't think they are posted, so technically, because Clark spoke, Kirk should not. I do think that it's, as Clark suggested, you guys having a meeting and ratifying it is perfectly appropriate. It's not gonna hurt anything. The legal contract is signed here, but for them to have questions about how their ratepayers are gonna cover these things is perfectly reasonable. But, I don't think we should hear from another commission member in an unposted meeting.
So, and then the issue is not whether or not there's a vote, it's the question
You
of whether.
can't have a quorum.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you that well. By the way, you can't hear your remote either.
The issue is the quorum.
Yeah.
You now have a quorum.
I know
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't aware that it's there.
Okay, all right. So Kirk, based on that, we're not gonna take any comment from you, but why don't you, you can email us and follow up with us with your comments. There's a concern now that you have a quorum at an unposted meeting, and I would agree that I think Tom's probably right, that we don't wanna, don't wanna continue to have, unposted meeting. All right, let me turn to JR. You had your hand up earlier. Do you have any comments?
I just wanted to emphasize that while it is an emergency situation and an emergency procurement, it is my understanding, and Matt has a better handle on it than I do, but it is my understanding that the funding for this contract can be drawn down from existing fund balance in the sewer fund.
Yes, we have the money to cover it.
Okay, great. All right, does any other members of the public have any questions or comments about this agenda item? Yeah. Well, Craig, if you call me tomorrow, we can have a discussion with the meeting, not posted. Okay. With that, then I would take a motion.
I'll make a motion to authorize the town administrator to sign the agreement with Williamson Electrical Company Incorporated, doing business as Williamson Pump and Motor for emergency pump station repairs at the Broad Cove Sewer Pump Station in an amount not to exceed $299,686.25.
Second.
All those in favor by roll call. Liz?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. The motion carries unanimously. Thanks, Matt. Kathy, appreciate it.
Thank
you,
you.
Clark, as well. Thank you, Kirk, for being here.
I'll make sure my hair's better.
Oh, stop.
That's okay. Next item on the agenda is 2023 Annual Town Meeting warrant article discussions. The first item on the agenda is Article T, which is the naming bylaw discussion. That agenda item is going to be tabled until next week. That brings us to Article V, V as in Victor, permitting and design of inner harbor coastal structures. JR, you want to take the lead on this one?
Yes, sir. The engineering is, and the Harbor Development Committee are requesting authorization at town meeting for the expenditure of up to $355,000 towards additional permitting and design of harbor coastal structures related to the resiliency project that is ongoing, and as well as any permitting associated with other harbor projects that the town anticipates undertaking over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. The contract will be with Both, who has done a significant amount of work in Hingham Harbor, including most recently, they obtained a Chapter 91 license for the harbor mooring plan, and they also were the permitting consultant for the boat ramp, which was recently completed.
JR, thank you. Liz, do you have any questions?
Should we have that contract, Tom?
I'm sorry?
The Both
Liz,
contract?
And Jay, I don't think the vendor is the subject of the warrant article.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
It's just
Yeah.
moving
Oh,
forward
that's true.
with the
My
project.
apologies.
And then ultimately, we will see that contract and we will have the opportunity to vote on it. But that
That's
is
right.
not something that's before us tonight.
Correct.
Okay. Or the amount, correct?
That's exactly right,
Okay.
yep.
So I tried to take away all your questions.
Anything else?
In terms of the anticipated work, the first effort will be returning to the state to go through a NEPA process that will require an evaluation of previous design work that we've done, and some additional design work for new elements that we're anticipating. It will also, so there's a design element portion of that, and then the MEPA process. After that, we will be returning to conservation and planning to make sure that each of the elements of the design are consistent with local regulations, and that we get approvals of our local boards and commissions in completing that work.
Okay.
JR, thank you. Anything else, Liz?
No other questions. Thank you, JR.
Joe, any questions?
So, yeah, JR, this is consistent with, I think, the harbor development work that you and I have worked on in the past. I'm really glad to see that this activity is continuing. I mean, our resiliency, the town's need to guard against and protect against the intrusion of water onto our borders and beyond, very important. I'm support moving forward with this. I really think it's in the short-term and long-term interest of the town. So thank you for your work here.
Joe, thank you. Any members of the public have any questions or comments about proposed warrant Article V? All right, seeing none, I take a motion.
I don't know, we're voting on these?
We are.
Yep.
We are voting.
Yeah.
Ah, you're right.
Well, unless
Unless you don't want
you
to.
don't
No,
want.
no, no, I didn't realize we're
You
doing
wanna
the
hold this
vote.
next
No,
week?
no, I'm good. So I would make a motion to recommend favorable action on Article V.
Second.
All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Liz?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well, the motion carries. That brings us to the next agenda item, which is Article R, which is a proposal to amend general bylaws, Article 18, fees for plumbing and gas permits. We have Mike Clancy with us this evening. Mike, if you could come up to the, actually, you can sit at the table, Mike, if you'd like, whatever, yeah, come to the table. And just introduce yourself for the record, Mike, if you don't mind.
Mr. Chairman, can I provide just a little bit of an introductory, just
Sure.
knowing Articles
Yeah.
R and Z are directly related?
Go
I've
ahead.
been working closely with Mike on this, and I just want to point out a few things, just might allow things to unfold a little bit more smoothly. You know, we have two articles, Article R and Article Z. Article R relates to updating the plumbing and gas fees, while Article Z, which calls for amending bylaw number 29, which will include updating the electrical fees. Each of these articles deals with three basic points. First, and I think where we'll spend as much time as necessary, is just address the changes in the fees that our building commissioner is proposing and why. It's important to note that we're accomplishing a couple of other things with these articles. Through Article R, which also deals with the building revolving fund, we're ensuring that we're allowing for expending the building revolving funds fully in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and 1/2, which calls for allowing the funds to be used for salaries, fringe benefits, as well as equipment that would be necessary for the purposes of conducting gas, plumbing, and electrical inspections. And I also want to point out that for both of these articles, we're asking that going forward, the select board be allowed to adjust the fees as may be necessary from time to time. Currently, as written, both articles, bylaw number 18 and bylaw number 29, leave it to the town meeting to approve changes in the fee structure. So with this change, we're proposing just to take it down a step from town meeting and just provide a little bit more flexibility in terms of reacting to the changes in the market. So with that as background, I'll turn it to Mike, who will speak in great detail about the proposed fee structures.
All right, thank you. Mike.
Good evening. Under the Building Department Administration, the reason for the fees is the department generally charges fees for permits and services. Such fees are intended to defer the cost of operating the department. The fees charged for the building department services should maintain pace with the cost of operating the department. When I was asked about the fees, to come up with a schedule for adjusting them, I asked and researched some of the other towns around, but it's, as everybody knows, it's hard to compare Hingham with other towns. For instance, the 6 surrounding towns, Weymouth, Rockland, Norwell, Situate, Cohasset, and Hull, they don't do the volume of work that we do in Hingham, so it's kind of tough to compare us with those towns. So what I did, I added Duxbury, Marshfield, because they are a coastal community and build similar homes. Hanover, because they have the same amount of commercial and build similar homes. The contractors right now, which goes into this as far as inspections, the contractors right now are having supply chain issues, and they are requesting partial inspections. For instance, they'll do the downstairs on a home because they can only get half the wire to wire half the home at a time, half the plumbing, and so on. So they're asking us to do, instead of a home having 22 inspections, we might be doing 35 inspections because they're asking us to go out multiple times for a rough inspection. But I did want to, bring that up. As far as, we're on the residential plumbing fees. For instance, we haven't adjusted the fees since 2012. So right now, the minimum fee for a residential plumbing permit would be $35. What we're asking to do is to go to $50 to cover the cost to have an inspector go out and to have the admin do the work. If you were going to a new home, which would be around 2,500 square feet or less. The old fee is $200, and the new fee is gonna be $200, so we're not gonna change that. If you went to a larger home, it would change, and I can go to a different page for that. For instance, if you had a first fixture, it would be $35 on the old fee. It'd be $50 on the new fee, plus $15 for each additional fixture. Re-inspection fees that we have here, right now, they're $75. We would go to $100. Now, a re-inspection fee is for, if we go out to do an inspection and we find something's deficient, we'll go back out and do a second inspection. If we go back out the second time and they did not fix or what we were going out to look at the second time, we usually say, look, you need to fix this, and we'll come back out. Usually, after the third time we go out, then we charge a re-inspection fee. It's not like we charge it every single time when we go out. It's, multiple times, then we charge a re-inspection fee. A water heater would go from $35 to $50. So it's a $15 increase for a hot water heater, for the plumbing part of it. Do you-
Can I just jump in? Sure. What I think Mike is doing, and he certainly educated me in this process, is what he's highlighting is with the information that he's provided in the communities that he's proposing we compare the fees to, is that with the adjustments to the fee schedules for plumbing, gas, for Article R, as well as for electrical for Article Z, is that the fee increases will cover the cost of the building department conducting the inspections, but they're also roughly mid-range compared to the different communities, so that they're sufficient for operations, and they're also reasonable compared to the communities that make sense to compare Hingham's building department to. So as you can see with each of the fee schedules, there are a lot of different fees that apply in very specific ways. Mike's walked through a few examples. The complete data set is in your book for Article R, as well as for Article Z. And is there anything you'd want to add at this point, or?
I would take questions on the plumbing part of it, if you have any, sure.
Mike, thank you. So let's start with Article R. That's so that is the recommended amendment to general bylaws, Article 18, fees for plumbing and gas. So we'll just take them one at a time. Let's go with that proposed article first. Joe, do you have any questions?
So my first question, I think you've answered, which is that the rates that are being proposed are consistent with surrounding communities to the extent you've been able to get information.
Correct.
Yes. And do you know how often communities change these rates?
Well, most of them do it within 6 to 10 years, except for Weymouth. The last time they changed their fees was 1997. And the reason why, they have such a volume of work in the fees that come in, they don't need to adjust them. So that's why I thought they made a mistake when they sent us the information. I said 1990, they said no, they did not. So they're about the lowest around, but they do a tremendous amount of volume of work.
Okay. I mean, just listening to the discussion, there are two ways that fee issues can be addressed. One is to continue the way that fees are assessed, but to increase the dollar amount of the fee. The second one is to maintain the dollar amount of a fee, but to assess it more frequently. And it sounds like you are doing the first, which is keeping the way you're doing it, but just increasing the fee. Have you considered the other alternative of not raising the fee, but simply, for example, if charging the reinspection fee each time, as opposed to waiting until the third time, so that in fact there may be no reason to increase the fee amount if in fact it's assessed more frequently.
I haven't looked at it that way, no. As far as I think, over the years, charging a reinspection fee, even though they know they have to pay for it, it's almost like it's a penalty for them doing the work. So I kind of shy away from that.
Sure.
Some towns do it right off the bat, a reinspection fee, but once, twice, the fourth time, then we would issue that. But I have all the inspectors come in, and if they have that type of a situation, I like to discuss it with them, maybe get the plumber or the builder, and we talk it out first and see, and, if they made a mistake, they didn't understand what the inspector said. So I kind of think it's a penalty. Sometimes you do have to, it's like writing a ticket. Sometimes you have to, but we try and shy away from that.
Have you reached out to contractors or whoever you think appropriate and sort of floated what is being proposed and gotten a reaction as to whether or not they think this is reasonable?
Well, to be honest, the reactions we have is when they come in and pay the fee, they can't believe it's so low compared to some of the other towns.
So I can just report from my personal experience, it's been the opposite, which is I've had the contractor say, I can't believe the town is charging this much for these things. So I'm not disputing what you've heard, I'm just letting you know I've heard a different perspective.
Sure.
But it looks like you have done the work and the due diligence to really form a basis for this warrant article. So I've got no other questions.
Thank you. Liz?
Great, thank you. Yes, thank you for going through this exercise. I know it's quite a bit of work, but certainly one of the things we wanted to look at. As you know, the Sustainable Budget Task Force asked that all fee structures would be looked at, so I appreciate you doing this and giving us the benchmark communities as well. I was gonna ask about feedback, so that's interesting. I guess if some are saying it's high and some are saying it's low, it's probably just about right. Are you seeing any sort of trend in the market to increase gas permits as gas lines, if they're being discouraged? Do you see that reflected in any of the fees?
We've had questions as far as the new energy code, that they want everybody to switch over to heat pumps, which will decrease the plumbing permits, the gas permits, but it's going to increase the electrical permits. And I think there's gonna be an issue with the distribution of the power. Because if you, for instance, the homes that were built in the 40s and 50s and 60s that some people grew up in, they had 60 amp services in there and they were fuses. Well, it takes 60 amps now to charge a car. Back then, that's all you had in the house. Now, just 60 amps to charge the car. The homes that we're having now average here anywhere from 300 to 400 amps in a home in Hingham now. So it's gonna be a power distribution problem that I think they really have to work out before they change everything to heat pumps.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, and the fees, you feel confident cover the expenses?
It will right now. Again, who knows what's gonna happen down the road, but
Yeah.
We do have a couple of projects coming up that we will not be collecting any fees on, but we will be doing the inspections for the school and the public safety building.
Sure.
So that will take some of the revenue out of it, but I think we'll be able to maintain.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Any members of the public have any questions or comments on proposed Article R? Are you ready to vote
Yep.
tonight? Are you ready to vote? All right,
Yes.
with that, I'd take a motion.
I move to recommend favorable action on Article R.
Second.
All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Liz?
Aye.
I might as well, the motion carries. That brings us to Article Z. I know you kind of already talked through this already, Mike. Do you have anything to add to this one? You are, all right.
Well, I think I have, for electric,
And just note, Article Z is a recommendation to amend General Bylaws, Article 29, which deal with electrical permitting fees.
for instance, on electrical inspections for an in-ground swimming pool. You have a wall bonding, an outer light shell bond, electrical trench inspection, power trench, hand bond, final, and an inner light shell bond potting. So there's 7 inspections on an in-ground swimming pool. So it's, you know, and usually well, the way things are going now, they're usually putting the pool in with the house, so that brings us up to, you know, 35 to 40 inspections per house. So it's, there's quite a bit of inspections out there, as you can see with the reports and things we
Mike, do
give you.
you have to dive into the pool as well? Make sure the water's okay? Or?
Not this time of year.
Okay.
Time of year.
But again, the electrical would be the same as far as the minimum fee right now was 35, we'd go to 50. Same as the plumbing and the gas. It's not like we're changing anything as far as that. The minimum fee right now for a home for up to 2,500 square feet is $225. The new fee will be $275, which is up $50 to take care of the increased inspections that we do.
Art, anything to add?
No, I think I attempted to cover both
Okay,
articles earlier. Certainly welcome any questions.
thank you. Liz, any questions?
No other questions, thank
Joe,
you.
any questions?
I did have just one question. I noticed that the solar panel installation fee of $200 just stands out as high for an area that we are looking to encourage solar panel work. And is that number really necessary in terms of covering the efforts to do the inspection?
It is, because they spend about 4 hours out there to do that inspection, along with the electrical inspector. The fire department comes out with us, and the light department comes out with us. And they trace the wires back to the pole. Sometimes they have to put a transformer out there, and they have to discuss as far as the outside disconnects, where they can go, so the fire department has access to the roof in case of ventilation and things like that.
Yep.
So it is justified for that.
Okay, great.
And that will not be going up. That's staying the same as it is now.
Thank you. No other questions?
Do any members of the public have any questions or comments on proposed Article Z? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend favorable action on Article Z.
Second.
All those in favor, Liz?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well, the motion carries. Mike, good to see you, thank you.
Thank
you very
you.
much. Have a good night.
Appreciate it.
Sorry.
Have a good evening. The next item on the agenda is a discussion and potential vote regarding approval of the Massachusetts School Building Authority Project Funding Agreement for the William L. Foster Elementary School project and all associated documents. We have, I see, right, Aisha, Ray, and Linda here too. Aisha, come on up. Welcome to join us if you'd like.
It's up to you. Linda's away.
Linda's away, okay?
Yeah.
You can just both identify yourself for the record.
Sure. Good evening, Ray Estes, 92 Fort Hill Street for the School Building Committee.
Aisha Pong, Hingham School Department Business Manager, and 5 Nutty Hill Road.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So, thanks for inviting us back. As you may recall, a couple weeks ago when we were here giving an update on the project progress, we did mention that the project funding agreement had come in. I think Mr. Chairman, there's a letter addressed to you dated the 13th. The project funding agreement essentially is the main and probably last key agreement that gets signed between the MSBA and the town in connection with this project. It kind of outlines the process and mechanics for the grant distributions, the requirements associated with the project in order to receive the grant payments over time, certain representations as to the project and how it'll be conducted, and addresses a number of financial matters as well. There are a host of exhibits that go along with the agreement, which have gone through to the town administrator's office, which encompass virtually every submission that we've made to the MSBA, certifications, the educational plan. When it's all put together, it's probably, 2 feet tall. Along with the project funding agreement that is to be signed by the chair, there's a certification of legal counsel required, which Mr. Coughlin, I think, has, and is similar to the one that he did with the project scope and budget agreement a couple months back. I would point out that there is, like the project scope and budget agreement, a notice provision on page 27. I've already made a note and asked our OPM to request that the MSBA add a CC to the town administrator, as was requested for the project scope and budget agreement. So we will certainly make that a request.
You were listening.
Happy to take any questions.
Don't have any questions. The only comment is I'm thrilled to sign this and to move this project along. And just very happy the town meeting and at the ballot also approved this project, much needed, and looking forward to continuing to get this project moving. So, Joe, do you have any questions?
Yes, section 25-1 deals with your firstborn. No. No questions. I've reviewed this several times as in draft forms, and it's complete, and really appreciate your work. Thank you.
Sure.
Liz, any questions?
Right, and just to confirm, there weren't any surprises in terms of eligibility and the range of
No.
reimbursement, right?
No,
It's all
every-
consistent.
No, one of the exhibits is the reimbursement rate certification that was signed maybe 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, or it's certainly an older certification. So no surprises, no changes. It's a standard form agreement that was reviewed. I would point out that the letter that sent the PFA to Chairman Ramsey on January 13th, at the bottom of the first page, it outlines what's supposed to be submitted. The one item that already has been submitted is the local funding vote. That's number 4, a certified copy of the local funding vote. That's already been submitted with prior documentation, so that's not necessary to be duplicated.
Okay. And Tom, this is, our office will take care of this, or does it go back to the school
We
department?
can have John look at it. It's not gonna change much. It's the MSBA form.
Right, no, I mean,
what she was asking.
who's responsible for actually sending everything back?
Oh.
Is that us?
We can
Yeah.
gather everything and send it over.
Typically, someone needs to,
Yeah.
all the exhibits, everything gets assembled. I think the MSBA does a lot of that. But I think it's typically your office would coordinate with Aisha's office once it's signed.
Okay,
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get everything back to where it needs to be.
okay, great.
Did you have
Excellent,
anything
thank
you
you.
wanted to add?
No, I'm good, thank you, thank you.
Any members of the public have any question, comments on this agenda item? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I move to authorize the chair of the select board to execute the project funding agreement between the town of Hingham and the Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA, for the William L. Foster Elementary School project, and to sign all associated documents as required by the MSBA relating to this project.
Second,
All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Liz?
aye.
I'm an aye as well. The motion carries unanimously. Thanks very much, Ray.
you.
Appreciate your
Thank
continued
you.
work on this project. All right, Aisha, you can stay there. You can move over if you'd like, and Dr. Adams, come on up. And next item on the agenda is a potential reserve fund transfer for the school department. going to present this evening are going to be Dr. Adams and Aisha. I'm going to note we also have members of the school committee with us. That's Correnti, Jim Benham, and Michelle Ayer is participating remotely. So welcome to everybody. And Aisha, go ahead.
Thank
Turn it over to
you.
you.
So this request is for the potential transfer from the reserve fund to support the south playground that is not fully accessible. We have students currently who have mobility challenges, who cannot access all aspects of the playground with their peers. While we may be meeting ADA compliance as a school, we have higher requirements to ensure that our students can access the equipment and resources as their age-level peers. The school department has been working every year through capital to increase access to the playgrounds. However, it hasn't been sufficient, and they've been doing pieces and portions of the project. So this is in our capital request for the end of the year. However, we feel that the students have waited half the year. We don't feel that morally, ethically, we can continue to wait, as well as putting the district at risk legally for these particular students to have access. So the amount that we're asking for is $44,400, covers about 2/3 of the cost. The full cost of making the playground accessible is $67,802. What will happen, the request is for the mulches down on the ground. This adds some matting on top that allows students with mobility challenges to be able to access the playground. Do you want to add?
And this also will cover the upper playground and the lower playground itself,
Great.
where we do have a ramp, so the students can get to the ramp, but there's an inability for the student to actually join their peers, as Dr. Adams mentioned, on the lower playground as well.
I think a challenge for the school department is we've had series of emergency repairs that have been needed, and we have close to depleting. Our contractual line is overspent, and we're working through our revolving account for facilities, and given what we've overspent in the budget, we are, probably at a minus at the moment. So we are at a point where we just have no longer any funds. This includes $125,000 that we'll need to expend for elevators repairs that are immediate. We also have an upcoming need for repairs at the high school roof that are emergency as well, that are coming up. So these are immediate things that we really felt we could not wait.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Do any members of the school committee they'd like to add to the presentation? Michelle, Ness, or Jen? Michelle, go ahead. Just state your name and address for the record.
All right, thank you. Michelle Ayer, Chair of the School Committee, 41 Hemlock Road. Thank you very much for hearing this request. I think this is not something that we normally do, but as Dr. Adams pointed out, we've had some extraordinary expenses that we've been unfortunately forced to handle pay for out of revolving funds. So we're finding the need to come and ask for this. And to Dr. Adams' point, while we are technically ADA compliant, we do want to ensure that all of our students have full access to the equipment and areas of the school that they should have to make sure they have a good, warm, and welcoming environment that are in our schools.
Michelle, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions. I'm just going to note for the record, as you both noted, you've had some unexpected expenses, the roof and some other things. So, I fully support your request here. I agree with you that although the playground might be legally compliant with the Americans with Disability Act, I do think we have a moral and ethical responsibility to make sure that all students have access to the playground. So I fully support this request. Let me turn to Liz.
Yes, thank you for bringing this forward. It's certainly important for our students. How quickly can it get done? Do you know?
Well, we've placed the order in terms of the quote from the vendor. And in terms of that, we're hoping that it will be able to happen within the next few months as well, in terms of getting that matting. And just to also note that the matting that Katie recommends in this area here, it's a much cheaper alternative to other alternatives that we've had to use before.
Okay.
And it has a longer life as well, too.
Does,
So
okay.
that's also very helpful.
Okay, great, thank you. No other questions?
Joe?
I'm just wondering, how does South Elementary compare to the other elementary schools in terms of
Right.
the playgrounds here?
Yep, so as Dr. Adams mentioned, we're slowly making more of our playgrounds accessible. They are not, for example, at PRS, the lower playground is not fully accessible to all students who are in any way mobility challenged, but the upper playground does provide accessibility. So this is something that we're slowly working through. I think there's just a more immediate need at South for that change to occur this year than in these other schools.
I think at South, we have current students in
Right.
place right now, and that makes it more of an immediate need.
Right.
One other question to someone not sitting there, but to Ray, who's out there. Foster School, what the playground that will be there, is that, have you anticipated this issue and your playground will be fully compliant?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
I think I know the answer, but I
Ray
want to
Estes for the School Building Committee. Yes. Every inch of the property will be fully accessible, the
Right.
building, outside the building, the
Yep.
playground. In fact, I haven't seen the plans or the
Right.
order or anything, but I believe what's being requested for South
South, yes.
is very similar to what was just put in temporarily at the
Foster.
Foster site, at the site of the old tennis courts, where there's mulch, and then there was these mats that were put down,
Yep.
so that accessibility is possible.
Yeah, I didn't know if one was being modeled after the other.
I think it's a pretty common
Oh, okay.
approach to this type of thing when you're not gonna rebuild it from scratch, and you're trying to kind of retrofit the
Yep.
current situation.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
No other questions?
Any members of the public have any questions or concerns about this agenda item? All right, seeing none, I'd take a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend a transfer from the reserve fund to school department, other contracted services in the amount of $44,400.
Second.
All those in favor, Liz?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well, the motion carries. Before I let you go, Aisha, I'm coaching your son in basketball, as you know. And we have a playoff game on Saturday.
Yes, that's
So it's a
right.
big- It's a big day, so we'll see you on Saturday morning.
Thank you.
And here's your,
Signed
that's
one.
down to Art.
Yep.
I've signed it and
Thank
noted
you.
the amount, so.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you
right,
very
have a
much.
great night. Take
Yes,
care.
you too, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Next item on the agenda is a preliminary FY '24 budget discussion, and we're gonna turn it over to Tom and Michelle to take the lead on this one, so go ahead.
Thank you very much. So, I think we're gonna start with the financial forecast, which Art is gonna hand down the row.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Okay, so we have some wonderful news to report. We actually held a financial forecast meeting last night at 5 o'clock with representatives from the school department, from the town, Chairman Ramsey, I know you were there, the members of the school committee, Ness and Michelle. So it was a great conversation. We had George from advisory committee there, and I was able to announce a lot of really good news. I think that one of the big takeaways, well, the takeaway, is that we were able to, due to a number of factors, which I'll get into in a second, but we were able to downsize the deficit, not necessarily the override, but the deficit, from the original projected 7.5 million from last week and a couple of weeks prior to that, down to now 6.2 million, which is great. So 7.5 million down to 6.2 million. I'll walk us through how that happened. So mainly, when you think of our forecast, you think of it as a revenue forecast, as you should. We use it as a balancing tool, but it's a revenue forecast. So the revenue numbers for a couple of main categories came in this past week, as they do every year. The excise, and for every community across the state. The motor vehicle excise numbers came in higher than projected statewide, but also that was realized here in Hingham, which is a great sign. And then on top of that, we got Q2 numbers for the meals tax revenues, licenses and fees, and most importantly, our investment income, which is up significantly. So we're seeing a lot of great trends in a lot of places, and all that does is it allows us to trend higher our revenue projections for FY24. So that's what we've done. There was also some expense moving on the union contracts in Article 4. A bunch of the contracts have settled, and those come out of Article 4. So expenses went down, revenue went up significantly, and we were able to realize a $1.3-ish million gain in our deficit. So decrease of the deficit. So all great news. Any questions? I'm here to answer them.
Yeah, so Tom, I just want to clarify something. So the change is not because of a change in your modeling or approach, it's because you now have better data.
That's exactly right. The Q2 numbers just came in last Friday.
Okay.
The motor vehicle excise tax came in on Friday as well. As soon as they come in, we scheduled a meeting. I actually called representatives of the school department and the three of you on Friday afternoon to explain all this so that everybody that needed to know right away knew. And then we scheduled the forecast meeting so that it was formal on Monday afternoon. And here we are tonight talking about it and presenting it.
Well, obviously, the trend down is great to hear.
Yeah.
And the fact that a week ago we were looking at a 7.5 number, and now we're at 6.2 is great. Am I right that optimistically we will continue to trend down? It won't be significant, but
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, there will be downward pressure still on this deficit number, which is, again, great. There's a couple of factors still pending. Our healthcare costs, we always project our healthcare increases at 10% year over year. And since I've been here, it happened one time, we had I think a 15 or 16% increase. So we have to project a conservative number like 10% each year. Most years it comes in something less than 10. So there would very likely be a savings on that line item, for that expense line item, but we won't know that until March. And it's the same with, what's the other, so I'm looking at Sue Nichols, what's the other item that comes in March? Oh, the state budget, I'm sorry, the state budget. The governor will come out with her budget in March. And while it's not the formal budget, it's still subject to change at the House. It's usually a pretty good indicator of where things are heading. And we've heard from a number of sources that I think we can expect something higher in terms of state aid than we have in recent years. So we're cautiously optimistic there as well.
All good news. And you said we'll have more information late February, early March?
That's right.
Okay, great. All right, Liz, do you have any questions?
Thank you for bringing this forward. I was thrilled to see the local receipts go up and the investment income go up. That was all good things. Do we plan on presenting this just so the public can kind of track where we're at?
That's kind of what this is here. I just wanted to start our budget conversation with this forecast presentation. We just were able to have that forecast meeting last night.
Yes. Okay, so when's the next time?
The next one will probably come, unless there's a change to an expense number that I'm not expecting, will probably most likely come in at the March change. There won't be any
New numbers,
updates and any
yeah.
new numbers to warrant a forecast meeting in the interim. I know we'd all like to have more information before, but if the document's not changing, there's no sense in holding an update meeting. So I'm
Okay.
guessing early March.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good news.
Joe, any questions?
So this is good news. When we go forward and we are looking at a potential override, I think what we're looking at is not just next year. It's what it's going to look like over multiple years. And so is there any guidance we can get from the changed numbers for next year in terms of informing us what the 5-year forecast would look like, so that as we're considering what's appropriate for an override, we can duly consider what we should be looking at, rather than changing it based on numbers that come in month after month.
Right. So the forecast is a useful tool, very useful for the current year and for the plan, the year that's being planned. It's less useful as you get further out, just because, times change and things change. However, I will say that it's not useless for that purpose. We use this in a number of ways, but we also have more accurate level of modeling tools that we use for projecting the out years and helping to make good policy on, I think, things like growth rates and the like, that I'm going to get into a little bit in my presentation, but that will help us understand the out years and the impacts of decisions to those years' budgets. So again, we don't end up with overrides every year or every other year. Yeah.
No other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, let's move into the presentation,
Sure.
and then we'll take public comment on the entire budget discussion.
Great.
Go ahead.
Okay. Michelle's going to bring that up on the screen. Okay, terrific. So this is our first real presentation on the FY24 preliminary budget. And of course, as anticipated for the last couple of years, we will in fact be planning for an override this year. That's the request you'll be getting from me in my office and the recommendation from me in my office. So we'll start, and Michelle and I will go this together. We'll be back and forth here, tag team in this presentation a little bit, so bear with us. But we'll walk through a number of items. We'll start with the, where we are right now and what we're anticipating. You just heard the good news of the forecast and how that affects things. We'll also talk a little bit about how we got here, and it's easy as we go through this exercise of budgeting. It's always amazes us how easy it is to forget what happened in 2021, and what we were dealing with, and the decisions that were made at the time, with the information we knew at the time, et cetera. So Michelle will walk us through a bunch of that. We'll talk about what an override means. We've done this a couple of times, but I think it's really important for the town, as they hear us talking about the override, that they truly understand what it means and what it is. And then I'll get into some of the proposed balanced budget, which is the way we're going to fill this deficit. That's the balanced budget. That's not necessarily the budget that I'm recommending. That's the balanced budget. And then the service impacts of that balanced budget. So there are a number of cuts that will have to be made in order to accommodate the deficit, right? Mm-hmm. Property tax relief, we'll talk a little bit about that. We have a lot of programs in place right now. The task force, the Sustainable Budgeting Task Force, and under Michelle's guidance and with Liz's chairmanship, has really put together a report that we're using as an active planning tool to help us understand how to mitigate the tax impacts to those that would otherwise be most impacted. So Michelle will walk us through some of the property tax relief programs. We'll talk about next steps, and of course, we'll take questions. Okay, so just from a high-level view, I think we can remember that the town is entering the FY24 budget season with a significant deficit. This is a result of a number of things that frankly occurred and began to occur at the beginning of COVID-19, at the beginning of the pandemic. The town had a lot of services that it needed and were critical. The school department had significant needs throughout that. Easy to forget now, 2 years later, what we were dealing with, but it was significant. And again, we'll remind everybody of all that. So in addition, we are experiencing, most of the towns in the state have the same types of stresses on their budgeting processes that we are this year as well. So I'm not suggesting everyone's in the same position, needs override this year or next, but 2.5% is no longer enough to cover the services provided by local government. So the good news is Prop 2.5 gives us the tools to be able to deal with revenue shortcomings when that happens. We will, the town, in fact, used a significant amount of one-time federal and local reserve money. We did that all eyes wide open. I like to say we all held hands and jumped off that cliff together. We had financial plans in place in FY21 we'll talk about, and the select board at the time, the advisory committee, the school committee, we all walked through this together. We understood the pressures, we made some decisions, and then we brought it to town meeting that adopted both of those budgets in 21 and 22 unanimously. So again, reminding people of how we got here and what we did. And then as we move away from the pandemic and we're looking to bridge the funding gap permanently, we are in fact in a place where we either have to reduce services, which we will show because we have to, as a balanced budget, we'll show how we would do that, or we can raise recurring revenue again through an override and fund those shortfalls and not have to implement those cuts. So that's the current situation and where we're at. So how did we get here? Michelle will walk us now through memory lane.
Thank you, Tom. So this is a longer version of what Tom just summarized. But going back to the pandemic pressures, like taking us back to the winter, spring of 2020, this is a period that I think we're all trying to forget. But it's worth talking about where we all were and what information was available at the time. So that March, we had just finished the normal FY21 budget process, the day that a lot of these states of emergency were being declared on a global, national, state, local level, et cetera. We were starting to hear there was a lot of uncertainty, especially about revenue. The state had announced that its tax revenue had gone down by 19%, so we weren't sure if our state aid was gonna come through for FY21. The economy was grinding to a halt. We weren't sure if folks here would be able to pay their taxes depending on what happened to their work situations. Restaurants were closing, so our meals tax dried up very quickly. So we kind of had to go back to the drawing board with all this uncertainty and put together a plan for FY21 if our revenues did not materialize as we had been hoping. So that spring, for the next few months, the Select Board, AdCom, and School Committee worked on a financial management plan for FY21. And this plan called on using some of our fund balance, our rainy day fund, along with a lot of financial management tools, mostly holding back on some expenditures, kind of implementing some hiring freezes, not moving forward on some capital projects, so that we could bridge any gaps that might emerge in the revenue picture. And it also talked about how if the deficits in revenue were larger than we expected, how the school municipal departments would make up pieces of those deficits to be able to move forward. I think a key piece of this plan was that we didn't want to prematurely cut back on educational and municipal services. So we did this trying to minimize disruptions to our operations, and we also wanted to preserve the financial condition of the town. So all three boards adopted that in May, and we brought the new budget forward to town meeting that spring. If you guys remember, this was the really hot outdoor town meeting, our first one. This was in June, so town meeting unanimously voted for that budget. So we entered FY21 with this tool in place, and as the year progressed, fortunately, those revenue shortfalls did not materialize, in large part because A, our property tax revenue was stable, which was really wonderful, and B, because the state aid cuts didn't materialize. So state aid came through for us without these big reductions. So even though things like meals tax dropped and our investment income dropped, we were able to make it through with this plan using a little bit of fund balance, but not as much as we had initially planned for. However, at the same time, as we went through this year, obviously we had transitioned to remote learning. We had gone through a period of remote work as well. A lot of needs emerged, and there were some acute needs in the schools, and it just exacerbated some of the structural deficits that we had seen in our school municipal departments for a long time. So in that light, as we were starting to plan for FY22 that spring, the Select Board, AdCom, and School Committee all recommended adding significant capacity across the organization in the 22 budget. This little excerpt here is from AdCom's report in the 2021 warrant, and it shows you where the increases were. So both the municipal and school departments added a significant amount. A lot of these increases included 36 positions across the town. Most of those were concentrated in the school department, and we added 4 in the municipal departments. And overall that year, we saw about a $5 million increase to the budget. The specific positions and capacity that was added are shown in this list. So we looked at like the school recovery budget, the new townwide field maintenance program that's proven a lot of excellent results over the last 2 years in improving the conditions of our fields. We had tried to address some structural deficits in legal and snow and ice, and we added a number of positions across the board to try to add some capacity there. I do want to point out, let me go back for 1 second, that the $5 million difference here is more than just the total here of the added positions, because as others have pointed out, we've been struggling with this revenue and expenditure problem for a while, where our expenditures have outpaced revenue, primarily because of the constraints under Prop 2.5. It's hard for us to live within the 2.5% increase that's allowed under that, plus new growth year to year. But we'll return to that concept in a second. So in the spring of 21, again planning for FY 22, we put together a plan, and everyone was on board with utilizing the federal funds that had become available to the town and some of our unassigned fund balance. Again, that's the rainy day fund, and everyone collectively decided it's pouring out, it's time to use this and keep things in place. So we did make a plan to use up to $5 million of that money. And at the time, the advisory committee and select board, everyone signaled the need to control growth going forward and explore looking at an override potentially in FY 23. So to Tom's point, we knew that we were creating this cliff that we would hit, but we needed to add this capacity in FY 22. Town meeting that May, this is May of 21, the second outdoor town meeting, the one that was kind of chilly, unanimously adopted that. And again, here's a picture of chair at the time, Bob Curley, made it clear that we needed to look at an override or some other way to sustainably fund the budget going forward, given that we are supporting these additional requests with one-time funds. So understanding that we were creating a large structural deficit in our operating budget, we formed the Sustainable Budget Task Force, of which Liz Ness and I were all part of, and we started to look at developing a longer-term financial management plan. So we worked on that that fall and winter, and it combined municipal, school, and former AdCom leaders to look at our revenue opportunities, both tax and non-tax opportunities there, look at our expenditures, and identify different ways we might be able to fund the budget going forward. This report is still on our website. Here are the five of the main recommendations that were taken right from our executive summary. One was that the town was experiencing the increasing budget pressure that we've talked about, from expenditures outpacing revenue growth, and that was prior to the pandemic. Two, that we should seek tax and non-tax revenue to continue to provide the high-quality municipal and school services that everyone here expects and supports. Three, that we might want to target a 3.5% expenditure growth rate for the municipal and school departments in future years to better align with how our revenue's coming in. This was a target at the time. It's something that we will look at through this process, and I'm not sure that 3.5% is the right amount, but this idea of trying to come up with a target that we can all manage to help us figure out, how many years between now and the next override can we make it through without proposing a large increase like that. Four, that the town should consider closing the FY 23 gap again, using federal funds and other one-time monies. Again, they were available to us for a second year, so we were trying to take advantage of the resources available and not asking the taxpayers to pay for that money a year early. And then five, that we should consider proposing an override in 24, because our task force, we explored a lot of different revenue opportunities, but there wasn't another big money tree out there. There wasn't another big non-tax solution that was really going to help us kind of close this size of gap. So similar table from before, now we're looking at FY 23 again. It was determined that all of the additional positions and services that we added in 22 remained critical, so we kept them in the budget. I think that year AdCom felt like it was important to try to hold that line steady, and although municipal and school departments proposed a lot of additional requests, very limited ones made it through the budget process. It was mostly the sustainability coordinator that was added on a contract basis. But that year, the level services budget for the municipal departments did grow based on the wage and classification study that we did for the first time in 20 years for our non-union employees, and based on some union contract settlements. And the school budget was held pretty steady based on some changes there with out-of-district tuitions, but they came in at basically level services and level funding for that year. Overall, in FY '23, the budget increased by $3 million, as you can see at the bottom of this. Last year, town meeting once again unanimously chose to support this plan, so we maintained the positions. We employed $3.8 million of federal and one-time funds, and we started to plan for an override. For this one, I do want to read this because I think this is important. This was from the AdCom's report in the 2022 warrant, so the last one. And again, it's signaling the need for an override. We've been planning for this and talking about this for some time. So the AdCom report says the use of one-time revenue is not sustainable, and the town needs to reconcile revenues with expenses through an override. While the Sustainable Budget Task Force identified several potential revenue options, they are insufficient to meet the near-term budgetary needs, and it is expected that an override will be placed before the citizens at the 2023 annual town meeting and the 2023 annual election. At that point, citizens will have the opportunity to approve an increase in taxes to permanently fund the level of services they desire. If insufficient revenue is raised, then the town will have to reduce expenditures to match revenues. This action would include reducing staff and services. So that's really where we are right now, and we knew that these decisions were coming before us. So that brings us to, we wanted to do some quick reminders for folks of just override basics to make sure that people, there's gonna be a lot of terms that we're throwing around, and we wanna make sure that people have a clear understanding of what they mean. And all of this, most of it's on our override website, and all of these will be posted to our website as well after the presentation. So what is a Prop 2.5 override? It is a voter-approved permanent tax increase, and it's designed to provide a community with the ability to generate recurring revenues. So to help us fund these expenses that are likely to continue year after year into the future, like annual operating and fixed expenses, which often are positions and programs that are ongoing. Some of the key terms, Prop 2.5 is the state legislation from 1980 that placed constraints on how Massachusetts cities and towns can raise revenue. There's two main caps that it put on us. One is from year to year, we're really only able to raise the tax levy, so all of our real and personal property tax revenue. We're able to raise that by 2.5% automatically under Prop 2.5. But we can't go above that with certain exceptions. The second one is the levy ceiling. It's not something that Hingham worries about because we're less than half of the way there. This is based on the total full and fair cash value of all of our taxable property here, but we have at least another $100 million to go before we bump into that limit, so we just kind of ignore it for now. And new growth is one of the other ways our tax levy can automatically increase. So new growth is really about new development in town. It's everything from new apartment buildings in the shipyard to an addition that you may put on your house or business. I think we went over this slide in the joint session last time, but just a visual of how people see how the override becomes a permanent part of our tax base. When we begin building the FY24 tax levy, we start with last year's tax levy, and we add to that the automatic 2.5% increase we can under the law, and any new growth that's occurred in the last year. But what we're trying to do this year is add the yellow piece, an override, an amount above that would generate some additional income. And those three bars taken together become part of the base next year. So in FY25, if we're successful, our new base will be that much higher. And that will all grow by 2.5%, and we'll be able to add to that any new growth. But I want to focus in for a minute on the new growth piece of this. This is something we looked at in the Sustainable Budget Task Force report, that a big reason why Hingham was able to make the math work in terms of expenditures that were outpacing revenue for years over the last 10, 15 plus years was because we had a fair amount of development going on in town. So if you think of Linden Ponds and adding buildings over there, you think of the whole shipyard with Avalon and some of the different projects, and then everything on Beale Street around Lynch Field, a lot of that really increased our new growth numbers, which added more than 1% in many years to that 2.5% and helped us get by. But right now, for the last 2 years, new growth has dropped down. There's sort of this steady level of around 650,000 or 700,000 that our assessing department sees as sort of the normal activity in town in terms of some smaller residential and commercial improvements. But it's nothing like we don't have anything right now on the horizon that's a big building or a large project that we see kind of coming in at the end of this period to help us through with new growth.
That said, I'll jump in real quick on this slide. We have, knowing that this was coming and that this was going to be, the lack of new growth was going to exacerbate our budgeting problems. We identified this a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and started building a team to help us through this process. So there's development to be had in South Hingham. We have a South Hingham study report that was completed 2.5, 3 years ago, and will guide our hand in that development effort. We have a couple of very large property owners down there that we have regular discussions and meetings with. The important thing to remember is that in the last year and a half, 2 year process, we've created 2 new positions to help us with that effort. The first is sitting to Liz's left. Art Robert is our ATA of operations and also our head of our economic development team. And the other thing we did was we added a position to the planning staff that allowed for full-time staff to support the planning board, while the director of community development can help direct community development and work with Art on economic development efforts. So in the past, her day regularly got eaten up by the day-to-day functioning of a busy planning board. So we have the capacity. That's new. We're working with that. It's working well. We're seeing some dividends from that effort. Unfortunately, both of those positions are in my proposed balanced budget that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And this is kind of the irony, right? It exacerbates the problem when we have to take 3 steps back instead of continuing to move forward like we have been. So, but I'll stop there. So the takeaway is we saw this coming, we worked towards it, and we have some capacity in place to help us through this and fix those light blue bars into dark blue long bars as we get to them.
Thank you. So the 2 votes that will be before the town, we're anticipating this spring, would be, in terms of an override passing, it would require a majority vote at our town meeting in April and a majority vote on the ballot at the town election at the end of April. And Prop 2.5 did give municipalities overrides as a tool to use. I know they are often not popular tools, but this is actually a lower bar than a debt exclusion like we had in the fall. There's just the majority vote at town meeting instead of the 2/3 vote, and I'm not sure if they meant it this way, but I see that as more of a proof that it was meant to be used as a tool. And so I'll turn it back over to Tom.
Thank you, Michelle. So now we'll talk about the proposed balanced budget. Again, the balanced budget, the cut budget, the reductions budget, different terms for the same thing. This is a budget that balances our expenses to our projected revenue, which, as we talked about, is $6.2 million below our level services requests. So,
Tom, so this is a budget that assumes no override.
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And therefore, we have to cut services to match that revenue.
Got it.
Yep. So the town is required by state law to adopt a balanced budget. I think we all know that. That's a standard. The DOR won't certify us if we don't. So we have to adopt a balanced budget.
So what does it mean if the DOR doesn't certify it? What are the implications?
Horrible bad things.
What does it mean?
I honestly, I don't know Sue was sitting here a minute ago. She might know. I don't know off the top of my hand.
I think it means we lose the ability to collect property taxes.
Correct.
I
Right.
believe that's true.
So it's a really.
Significant.
Everything falls
It's
apart.
a material issue.
It is, yeah. So current deficit, as I just said, through the forecast is $6.2 million. Right now, we've been talking about a 65 and 35% splits of the responsibility for that between the town, the municipal side and the school side. With the town assuming 35% responsibility for that. I guess that number is still being discussed, but that's what we've been working towards for the last several weeks anyway. So and that creates a municipal target cut rate of $2.177 million. You know, we've applied an approach to determining how best to identify the reductions on the municipal side of the budget to reach that $2.1 million. We are trying to maintain our contractual and legal obligations, obviously, we have to do that. Municipal governments have core services that we provide. We have to continue to provide those. So we can't cut very deeply into the core services. We're also identifying any of the new positions that were identified in the last couple of years as first-line casualties in terms of the cut budget. We are also attempting to spread the impact as fairly as we can across multiple municipal departments, so that, in fact, again, we're not targeting just one or two sectors. And then, you know, obviously, what I'm going to do tonight is try to demonstrate the community impact of what these cuts would mean to the town. And if the override does not pass, if it fails at one or both of the town meeting and or the election, then the reductions would go into effect on July 1st. Okay, so breaking this down into our service sectors, of which we have several. General government, the total FTEs that's full-time employees in the general government sector would be a reduction of 5.6 FTEs, totaling a little over $500,000. Public safety, this is police and fire, would realize a reduction of 5 FTEs, totaling over $600,000, $660,000. Public works, about 9.3 FTEs at nearly $500,000. Human services, a little over 2 FTEs at just about $150,000. And then the culture and recreation. We're still trying to figure out the exact number of personnel, but the dollar amount will be $495,000 in reductions in there. So that's totaling $2.3 million. That number is in fact a little higher than our, hold on a second. I went the other way. Sorry, I lost my notes page. That number's a little bit higher than our
2.177.
than the municipal target number, and that's simply because when we reduce personnel, we have to pay for their unemployment costs. So there's additional costs that get tacked on top of the reductions that we make. So that's why that number's a little bit higher. Okay, so now I'll go through each sector. General government, again, just about $500,000 in reductions. I am going to kind of go through each of these bullets, if you don't mind. By the way, for the general public and whoever's watching this presentation will be on the website tomorrow, and we'll talk a little bit about our communications tools and what we're doing there later. And this presentation will be available for anyone to sit and consume in a little bit more reasonable time frame than what I'm going to go through it with. But we'll be reducing support in the general government sector for the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, Affordable Housing Trust. You know, that's a group that does not get a lot of municipal staffing support, and any support that it gets is directly related and felt by the folks that they're trying to help. So that's a difficult one. And then, of course, any related applicants and projects will be affected within all of those regulatory boards. You know, this will significantly slow our economic development efforts. Again, I spoke about this a few minutes ago, ironically, right? That's what's going to get us out of this mess. Unfortunately, these were new positions, and they will have to be cut in the cut budget or in the balanced budget. So that will limit our capacity to increase the tax base. We are looking to reduce support for the select board, myself, and the work being done out of the town administrator's office, boards and committees, and the support that they get through staff. That will there will be a decrease in capacity and efficiency across the whole town that I think will be felt by just about every board and committee. We'll be reducing support for department heads and their missions. You know, right now, the ATAs, the assistant town administrators, each have a series of departments that they're responsible for staffing. If we lose one of the ATA positions, then all of those department heads will be reallocated among myself and the other ATA and back to what it was. And that level of service has proven to be inadequate for the pace of progress in this town. So I'd hate to see that happen for a number of reasons, but for that reason especially. We'll be looking to, unfortunately, have to close GAR Hall to the public. We won't, of course, mothball it. It's a museum. There's a lot of valuable and historic items in there that we want to maintain in their condition, of course. But they, so we would keep, temperature and climate-controlled space, but it would no longer have an R&M budget, and we would, in essence, close it to the public. We would decrease the maintenance here of municipal facilities. The GIS capacity, that's the Geographic Information Systems capacity, would be removed and actually ultimately reduced, because there are some core things that we have to do statutorily. We have to maintain parcel maps, et cetera. But we would greatly reduce our capacity there, which affects our strategic decision-making efforts. And then, of course, we would reduce the town's ability to effectively communicate with the public. Our recent, last 2 years or so, we've been using a communications consultant to help us get all the wonderful things that are happening in town out to the public so that they're aware of it. And I think that that's starting to take hold. We would have to undo all that. Okay, next sector is public safety. Again, this is some of the core, these are some of the core, we're dancing around things here, right? This is some of the core services that the town has to provide, in addition to things like education and health services. We provide public safety. So we would be reducing police support to the schools. Safety and security would suffer. We would have a presence, the presence at drop-off and pickup would be reduced. We'd have, traffic safety concerns. Community and youth relations, the DARE program would likely be canceled, and classroom curriculums would suffer, because right now our school resource officers would have to currently do that work. They're in the classrooms working with the children, so that would suffer as well. We would diminish the ability to support community members with a mental health crises. That is unfortunately an acute need right now, and certainly hate to have that reality, but again, cuts are difficult and wide-ranging. We would reduce our ability to respond to animal control needs. We would reduce the support for our police administration, which would slow the accreditation process. We would decrease the fire minimum staffing from 11 to 9 on certain shifts, and what that will do is it will, in essence, pull one engine out of service for a period of time during the course of the week, and or an ambulance, probably an engine, and that, in fact, just lessens our service. It would result in higher response times, which would likely exceed the national standards, and it certainly would exacerbate the remaining staff and their stress levels, as fewer people will then be responding to the same number of calls that had always been coming in. And then we would likely, we would be eliminating the CPR training that the school department and the municipal departments all get regularly now. We get a lot of people, public and otherwise, in and out of our facilities, and I, for one, have always liked knowing that our staff is fully trained and able to help people in an emergency. That also will go away. Okay, next sector is Public Works. With a $500,000 reduction in Public Works, we would see a reduction in trash and recycling pickup. We would see a great reduction in the mowing of fields and the maintenance of public grounds and parks. We'll talk about that in the next sector as well, but that's, we had such great success in that maintenance program. I just, this just feels like, I said 3 steps backwards, maybe 10, away from the progress we've been making. Support for special community events would also go away. And we'd also suffer, we wouldn't have the staff to regularly do the tree planting that we do across town. We would realize a delay in filling potholes. There would be limited line painting. Right now we have a program that maintains, it sounds like a silly thing until it isn't, right? So we repaint these lines and stripe the streets in a very aggressive way in this town so that there's clear, safe streets. That will go away, and it will be immediately apparent and cause, hopefully not, but possibly cause unsafe situations. We would have to we'd have to close the swap shop, the yard waste area a couple days a week, and the trash compactors and trailers over at the transfer station. Okay, for the human services reductions of about $150,000, we would be decreasing the ability to provide public health services in general. We'll have to eliminate our social worker position. Right now, that's a position that's filled by a contracted position, but we're hoping actually to get that back into a staff position here in the spring. And again, we're in this place where we have acute needs and they're new. And this is the kind of position that we're hoping to help get us through these difficult times. And it'll be a real bummer to lose that kind of capacity. And then we would be significantly reducing the senior center transportation program, which would hinder the seniors' abilities to get to appointments, shopping, events, programs, and the like. Okay, our culture and recreation sector is another $500,000 would be cut from that program. We would be eliminating that townwide field maintenance program that I've mentioned now a few times that was so successful. You see the photo down the bottom. Hate to lose that. We would be closing the public library on Sundays. We would be reducing the children's and other programs offered over at the library, partially jeopardizing the library certification, or potentially jeopardizing the library certification, as well as the ability to maintain membership in the OCLN network, and we would likely lose some grant funding. And then lastly, we would be diminishing our ability to hold the types of ceremonies in town that I think the town prides itself on. We take a lot of effort and a lot of resources go into our Veterans Day ceremonies and our Memorial Day ceremonies and the Battle of Grape Island ceremony. A lot of that stuff doesn't just happen, it happens in the background with a budget. And when we slash the budgets, the ceremonies will change on their face. And I think this town will not like that change. So anyway, on to the next. So the next steps in the override, in the budget and override process is, these are some identified next steps. There may be more, frankly, within here. Some of these are generalized, some of them are specific. But as we move through the coming weeks, things will crystallize. So we'll have some ongoing outreach and informational changes, campaigns. The key location here is going to be the town's website. We will be promoting all of the efforts that we make for the budget process through all of our social media channels, but the town's website will be the best place to go and get and download and read and watch videos, et cetera, of all of the processes that are happening to date. That website, by the way, was launched this past, well, there's another slide coming up. I guess I can go into that. We launched that website last week, so I'll get into that in a minute. We will be finalizing the balanced budget and reductions, which you just heard. That will go over to the advisory committee. We'll be finalizing the financial forecast in early March. You see a near final version now. Like I said earlier, there'll be downward pressure on that number, which is great. That will be finalized in early March, and again, inform some of AdCom's work at the end as they go through their final steps in March. And then we'll be finalizing an override proposal. That override proposal will include the funding for the deficit, so coming out of deficit, and also some additional requests. I don't have a final list of those additional requests available just yet. We've been through a number of situations, number of iterations, but that's not, I don't think that's ready for prime time yet. As we finalize that, we'll let the town know. As soon as we got that number, then that will be my new recommended budget, and to that we'll attach a tax calculator on the town's website, so that people can come in, type in their address, and they'll get an estimated tax impact of what the override size will mean for them and their family. We're also talking about a financial management plan, and this might, we'll see where this goes. We have a lot of discussions and a lot of conversations that we have to have, but this might include things like growth rates, and help us try to understand what are reasonable growth rates and what are acceptable growth rates in terms of the revenue projections that we have. What will allow us to get the maximum number of years between overrides. you know, and I'll take this moment, I've said before, I talked a little bit about overrides and at other meetings where I think this town has been lucky. Michelle talked a little bit about our new growth and how we have been able to avoid overrides in the past because of some large growth projects over the years. But the reality is, those are drying up. There are fewer and further between, and the cost of municipal government is going up beyond 2.5%. We're going to need regular overrides, hopefully not, you know, too regular. The question is, what's regular, right? That's the big question. Is it once every 5 years, 4, 6? I don't know the answer yet. We got to work with our colleagues at the school department, understand the pressures that they're under and the operational needs they have, their growth rate concerns, our growth rate concerns, our pressures, and how to control all those are big parts of the conversations that we'll be having here in the future weeks. And then hopefully we can turn all those conversations into a financial management plan that will help govern that process going forward, and try to help us understand how to avoid too many overrides over too short a period. Then we have to send the warrant to the printer. This, just so everybody knows, a little inside baseball. This is the date, March 24th, 2023. We identified that about a year ago or 7 months ago, whatever it was, as that's our guidepost. That everything we do backs up from that date. We have to get that warrant out to the printer on that date so that it is printed and mailed in time for the legal obligation of getting the warrant into everyone's mailboxes appropriately in advance of town meeting. So then we have town meeting coming up on April 23rd, the election the following Saturday, at which an override, like Michelle mentioned earlier, there will be an override question at town meeting and an override question on the town election ballot. Both have to pass by majority vote in order to be enacted in the town. So this is the website that I was speaking of earlier. You can get there at hingham-ma.gov/override. There's a series of FAQs and other information in there. There's a number of videos, documents, links to state web pages, explanatory documents. We have a link to the school department, has another page very similar to this with a lot of information on it. We've linked to that. So hopefully any questions that the public may have that we're able to answer now is answerable by reviewing information on that page. And of course, we'll update it as we go. All right, turn it back to Michelle to talk about property tax relief.
Sure, so we just wanted to end talking about some of the resources available. We are proposing an override, obviously, because we think it's necessary, but we understand that for some folks, this level of services and the tax increase associated with it is very difficult. We've talked about some of these programs before, but this slide is just meant to illustrate that we have over 12 different types of tax relief programs and exemptions. Our assessing department is really the main point of contact to help people figure out which programs they might be eligible for and which ones could help them. I also want to point out a couple things that we've been doing this year and that we'll be proposing at this town meeting. So first, we had a concerted effort to increase our outreach to folks around town to try to improve participation in the senior means tested tax exemption. This was a new tax exemption that the town added 2 or 3 years ago, and FY23 was the second year it's been implemented, and we were able to increase the number of people approved for that exemption by 300% between the first and the second years. So we're hoping to continue that momentum because that's an important new resource for people. There are 3 articles that we're proposing for the town meeting warrant that relate to property tax relief. Article O right now, this one would increase the maximum amount for veterans in the tax work-off program by $375 per year. So that would benefit people taking advantage of that program or new folks who would like to participate. Article W is probably the largest one. This would allow us to double all of our current statutory exemptions that we offer. This is something that the board considered the other week and moved forward. So that's a really important one. That affects most of or many of these of the programs on the previous slide here. So that would allow people to double the amount that they're eligible for in those categories. And Article M right now would permanently extend that new senior means tested tax exemption I mentioned. When the town first passed this 3 years ago, it has a 3-year expiration in there unless we take further action. So that article proposes removing that deadline, that expiration, and putting it in place permanently. So we'll continue our outreach campaign. Many people got the flyer shown in this slide in their tax bill that we mailed out in December. And we'll have, before the April 1st deadline for many of these tax relief programs, we're gonna do another kind of information blitz to make sure as people are looking at their income taxes, that they're also thinking about their property taxes here and knowing what resources we're making available. The best place to start for anyone who wants to go through their eligibility is our assessing office. The 4 folks there are excellent. They're experts in all of this, and they're happy to talk to people and walk people through what might be available to them. And on that note, this was a long presentation. Like Tom said, we'll post it to the website, but we also have set up an email. We've started to get some inquiries, excuse me, through override@hingham-ma.gov. So we are happy to help provide some information and answer any questions that people may have. Thank you.
Well, Tom, Michelle, thanks for putting that together. We appreciate it. You know, the potential cuts to our school department and to the municipal services you identified are significant. They're massive. They would set our school department back years, and the level of services that people are accustomed to on the town side would be drastically decreased with these potential cuts. I kind of speak for myself here, but I do want to say a couple things. 2 years ago, when we voted to add the new positions on the school side and on the municipal side, we increased the school budget 8.9%, and we added some much-needed positions on the town side. At the time, we had the opportunity to take advantage of a significant amount of federal funds to add those positions. We had also learned from our school department that there was identified learning loss among students because of the pandemic. At the time that, you know, I made that vote, and I'll let Joe speak to this, we knew that we would have to reconcile those new positions with additional revenue. I stand by that vote. You know, some people have asked, well, how did we get here? How did this situation happen? I stand by that increase to our school department. I stand by those additional municipal employees we added. It was the right vote, given the opportunity to take advantage of federal funds. And we also knew that our growth revenue was slowing. Last year, we were faced with another deficit. However, we still had federal funds that we could avail ourselves of, which we did. And then we decided, I think, as town leadership, that we would bridge the gap with the use of fund balance. But when we made that vote last year and the year prior to that, we were already discussing the potential for an override of some sort, of some capacity within the next 2 years, being last year or this year. So we knew we were going to be in this situation. And again, I think that was the right thing to do. The votes we made 2 years ago, for a lot of reasons, were correct, and I do stand by that decision to do that. And as we go through this process, we are going to tackle this process the way we tackled the fall, which is these are cuts that are going to impact all of us. As I said during the fall, it's one town, it's one fight. I know the 3 of us are committed, and I know my partners on the school department are committed as well, and well as advisory, to look at the entire town in the best interest of the town. We will not make this one board versus another or one budget versus another. These cuts are drastic for everybody. As we go forward with our decisions, which we make those decisions by Mass General Law, is number one, whether or not we will move an override question and place it on the ballot. And then secondly, what will the amount be or the amounts be for town meeting to ultimately make a decision on? We will not make that decision in a vacuum. We will hear from people, we're already hearing from people. Those decisions that are made by the various boards are going to be done in the best interests of our town, the best interests of our community. But we will make those decisions together. And we, as a community, have faced challenges before, and we will do what we've always done. We will address them, we will deal with them, and we will ultimately make the right decisions by the town, something that we've been doing for hundreds of years. So as we go, I know people right now are kind of down about a lot of different things, but we will get through this as we always do, and we will get through it together. And I know that as we go through this process, we're going to continue to focus on the best interest of the town, the best interest of our community, and we will get through this like we always do. So with that, I do have just two quick questions. You mentioned a financial management planning tool. I think you said we used it in '21. It was successful. Can you talk a little more about this tool, and
Sure.
is it a common tool that towns use?
Sure. So the financial management plan tool is part of a package that we've seen in towns like Arlington, Shrewsbury, Norwood. And those are all towns that we've talked to. A lot of them are very well-run communities. We communicate regularly with our peers and try to understand best practices. And using a financial management tool our management plan is certainly one of them. I would say that, that plan, what goes into it is still to be determined. I think we need to include growth rates. We need to look at things like the use of stabilization accounts, stabilization funds that we've talked about. I think you guys supported recently a warrant article to create a stabilization fund, a tax mitigation stabilization fund. Not that we named it very well, but that's what we're calling it. And the intent of that is to be able to seed that with money received or either put into it from fund balance or obtained through other means, such as maybe property disposition, or who knows what comes up during the course of any given year. And we could seed that fund with some of that money, and then be able to use it when we're trying to eke out an extra year out of before the next override. So if we're at year 4 and we have $1 million or $2 million in the tax mitigation stabilization fund, we could release that money into the budget and allow us to get one more year before we have to do another override, and maybe get to that 5th year, which is I think a lot of our goals. So we got to work through some of these details and what would go into it, what the language might look like. But absolutely, I think it's a tool that we should seriously consider using. We did do it in '21, and like Michelle walked through that detail or that plan in detail. I think it was a very well-received plan, and I think it's what helped us get to unanimity across the board with the budget process. So, if nothing else, it spurs the desire of all of the leaders of the community to sit together and talk through things and understand the pressures on all of our different operations and what the right approach is. So I look forward to those conversations.
The other question I have for you, Michelle, is one of the correspondence that I received was a question about, hey, we have all this fund balance available. We've used fund balance in the past to bridge the gap. We did it last year. Why do we even have to have an override? Why can't we continue to use fund balance? I think I know the answer, but let me turn it over to you to explain a little bit why that's not a good idea.
Sure. Thank you for that question. I think a couple things. One, we have used fund balance for the last few years, like we walked through tonight. Part of that was because there was an emergency situation going on, but we've depleted those resources significantly. And part of that was the vote that we took this fall to set aside $7 million that we had been saving to offset the tax impact of Foster School and the public safety facility. So there's not as much fund balance that has been available to us in the past. Moving forward with that, it's really against our financial policy to use a finite resource like that on a recurring basis. It's similar to the way that you shouldn't pay your rent every month with your savings account, because it's gonna run down. So we're in this situation right now where we use those federal funds, we use some of our fund balance, but there's just not a large balance left. It would get us through maybe this next year. And then we'd be hitting our our 20% of our financial policy, and it would start to have an impact on other things like our credit rating, which saves us money in a different way.
Thank you. Liz, any questions,
Great,
comments?
thanks, Bill. Well, thank you for the presentation. I know it was a tremendous amount of work, but very valuable. And I hope people will take time to look at it. Maybe we'll present it again. I'm happy to go through it with people. There's a lot of information here. And I think it's really helpful to have the historical context of how we got here, what those decisions were that were made. And to Bill's point, I think they were good decisions. Hindsight is always 20/20, but I think given the information we had at the time, they were excellent decisions and good financial decisions. Looking at the balanced budget, obviously, it's very difficult to hear. Those cuts are not aligned with, I think, our goals and values as a board, as a town. They're certainly not aligned with the master plan. And, I see those services as really critical to our community. So I feel like that would be irresponsible to go backwards to that extent in terms of cutting the level of services. Just to reiterate, that is a requirement. We have to put that budget together, so that's in no way a recommendation yet, but that has to be done. And of course, the Sustainable Budget Task Force, which was mentioned tonight, was formed just for this reason, to figure out what's happening with revenue, what's happening with expenditures, how can we explore other revenue options, and really looking everywhere and being creative about that. There's a number of recommendations, several that we're moving forward with, and we did recommend doing an override in FY24. For several reasons. We thought last year was not the correct year because we still had federal funds. We knew the school strategic plan was still being done, the staffing audit, which were critical inputs to that discussion. I am certainly concerned with community outreach and want to make sure that we continue that. I know I'm going to have a meeting with Tom this week about that. Again, to Bill's point, I think we certainly want to gather community input in terms of the services that people value, what the priorities are, what that override number, kind of what the appetite for that is, and hear from all sides. We have been receiving email. I read every single one. And as you would imagine, people have different opinions. I think people are very used to the level of services, which is a hard concept to say you need an override for level services. I kind of think of it as we've got them for free for 2 years, essentially. So this is now paying for the level of service that we've gotten used to, and seeing what's worked and what hasn't, which you don't usually get to do that. You kind of usually have to prepay with those added positions and services. So that's been kind of an interesting process. So in my mind, I'm concerned with the balanced budget, the override amount, and then certainly the growth rates, right? And to your point about the financial management plan is thinking through that and how we manage to that going forward. In the Sustainable Budget Task Force report, we did a lot of benchmarking to understand where Hingham fell. One of the things I know we looked at was Hingham's, where we fell relative to the other communities in terms of tax bills. I don't know if you remember that data or can kind of help us understand where we might be after the debt exclusions.
Sure, so that's something that we did post on the website already. This is based on the state data that they collect from the FY23 tax rate. So it's for the current year. It doesn't include anything in the future. So to your point about the debt exclusions in the fall, the first year that we'll see those impacts are 24. So those numbers aren't in here.
Okay.
But we did have a couple appendix slides just in case. Let me just find it. You guys asked. So this is on the website now. This is how Hingham compares in terms of the average single-family property tax bill. So it's a specific group. It's I think most of our properties in town, around 70%, are single-family homes. So we're just below the median in our benchmark group here. When we are ready with that tax impact calculator for the override, we'll do what we did in the fall, and we'll show this rolled forward to FY24, and we'll include the estimated impact of the override and the first year of the debt service for the projects, which we'll know at that time because our band sale is in the next few weeks. So we'll update that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's helpful to just keep up with that benchmarking information. We did so much of it. So I think, if we can keep that updated, that would be really helpful, just to give people a sense of relative to other communities and what other communities are being faced with. I think, we know a lot of communities are in this situation.
We can certainly add like the FY23 versions of those charts to the website now that most of the towns, by December 31st had updated their tax rates and got all that certified, so it's now available.
Yes, okay. Excellent, thank you.
Joe?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Bill made his comments about the votes that we took, and I agree. I think we stand by our votes. I think it was the right decision. But I don't think anyone should mistake our commitment to those votes as any indication that we will not be looking carefully at what's currently being proposed and making sure that we are being prudent with everyone's finances. And that is clearly all of our goals, to make sure that we are addressing the issues as they need to be addressed. But I agree with our chair that the votes we took at the time were the right decisions, and we need to support the town to make sure that the level of school services and municipal services are maintained. I do have a couple comments and questions. At the end of the presentation, Michelle, you talked about really the outreach for tax relief, and that stood in contrast with an item in what was going to be cut, which is our outreach program and our ability to really have effective communications. So I'm concerned that if in fact we don't have the override and these budget cuts come into effect, that the very programs that we're looking to implement for tax relief, the word won't get out. So it's one of those conundrums that our town administrator pointed out. I'm glad you talked about that we will have information about the combined effect of a potential override with the debt exclusions, because I think the folks want to see the cumulative impact. They're looking at their tax bill last year, this year, and then in future years, and it's going to have all of those included. I think this discussion really put an emphasis on the importance of revenue growth and how the town really needs to devote resources to make sure that we are doing what we can to maximize ventures coming in, opportunities. I know that Art's been involved. In fact, I think all of us have been involved. And the public should know that we are renewing and committing to that effort, because that is a critical aspect in making sure that the town can move forward. When we looked at the benchmarks in the past, and you had, looking here, one of the shortfalls in the benchmarks is we were assuming that no other benchmark towns were also doing overrides.
Right.
And in fact, that may be a false assumption, which means we're comparing our town with an override with other towns without an override, which might make it appear as if we're moving up, when in fact we aren't. So I just want to make sure that we are cognizant of that. One final point, and this is a question not necessarily for Tom, for you, or Michelle, and maybe it might even be a question for Liz and her committee. On slide, don't know which one it is, this one right here.
Just ask away, I'm sure I'll know that.
It's a very small report.
Going back, this one.
Right, so that there was a recommendation that we should target a 3.5% expenditure growth rate. That seems to be a recommendation that we will not be abiding by the 2.5% increase that we can do without an override. So it seems like that's a commitment to have an override. Because if we can only do 2.5% and we're committing to 3.5%, the numbers will require an override. So I think that is, in my view, the fundamental question that needs to be before town meeting. Is, are we committing to a 2.5% or something higher. Because if there's a case that we need 3.5% in order to succeed as a town, to continue as a town, then we are committing to an override. I mean, the math requires it. And I think that is where we need to have an extended discussion, and I think there'll be an extended discussion at town meeting. Because if in fact we are committed to the 3.5% expenditure, perhaps even higher, then we are committing to an override. There's no getting around it. And I think that needs to be a public discussion at town meeting, and people need to understand what it means to make that commitment. It's almost like you've got, in Congress, you've got a question about whether or not Congress is going to pay for the debts that they've already incurred. And here, we're committing to incur these debts at 3.5%. Are we willing to fund it? And I think that's an important discussion that we need to have in a public forum at town meeting and get resolution on that.
I completely agree. Do you mind if I jump in?
Sure.
Please.
I completely agree. I would say, though, that the 3.5 number is not that number. The 2.5 is obviously the limit that we can raise property taxes, but we have new growth and other revenue that comes in that changes. But something much higher than that becomes problematic, and that's the conversation that we need to have, for
So-
sure. So it's not 3.5 per se. It might be 4, it might be 4.5. But when you get into above the 3.5% number, you start running into those problems.
So are we saying that if we have a 3.5% expenditure growth, we can fund it without an override because of additional growth?
Yeah, so my projections, using some preliminary modeling, it showed that we would be able to get through probably 4 at least-ish years with 3.5%.
And no override?
Without an override. But there will be a need for an override. I think, and again, I had said this earlier a couple of times, I just want to make sure everyone understands. The years of not having an override for 13 years, those are vestiges of the past. That probably won't happen again. Unless, of course, and until we get some significant development again happening in town, which is, of course, also the goal.
Right.
But short of that, we would be able to get through 4-ish years at least, I think, with a couple of the other levers that we're creating, including the tax mitigation and stabilization account, appropriate use of the overlay account and releasing that, and some other revenue options. We would be able to get through 4-ish years without an override at 3.5. It's when you start getting higher than that, in the 4, 4.5, 5 range, that becomes very difficult to get through even a couple of years without another override.
But aren't you saying, Tom, that 3.5, if we commit to 3.5%, we are committing to an override every 4 or 5 years?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the commitment.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just making the point that it wasn't every year.
Right, no,
Yeah,
I agree. It certainly isn't every year.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
But so at 3.5%, given current levels, we would be committing to an override at
That's
least
right.
every 4 or 5 years.
That's
Yes.
exactly right.
So the modeling showed we could kind of handle 3 or 3.5% growth for several years. And so we thought that was more realistic than putting in 2.5%, because we haven't been growing at 2.5%
Right.
for quite some time. So that felt like kind of an artificial forecast that just, we never reached that. So it seemed disingenuous to put in 2.5%.
Yep, and that, I think, is the discussion, that
Yep.
2.5% is not reasonable.
Right, agreed. And I think that public discussion needs to happen before town meeting, frankly, because I think that's an integral part of that financial management plan, what we're all committing to.
Yeah, and I can jump in there too. So we talked a little bit about now our outreach efforts. Part of those outreach efforts will include public forums. We'll have a public or forum or forums for the public to come out, communicate with us directly. We'll have presentations, information exchanges, but there'll be an opportunity for that public discussion for sure, as well as in these meetings going forward as we discuss the budget. But there'll be dedicated forums for that as well.
Great. Nothing else. Thank you.
Right. Can you enlarge the Zoom screen for me so I can see everybody? I can't see everybody. Okay, I do see, but now. All right, if anybody would like to offer any public comments or questions, gonna ask you just to either raise your hand virtually or kind of just wave at us physically, and I will do my best to identify everybody. All right, Glenn Mangurian. Glenn, if you could just state your name and address for the record, that'd be great. Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you for this wonderful presentation. Tom and Michelle, you did a great job, and I'm sure that there were a number of other people behind you that contributed and added to what you said. I have two comments, I think one comment and a request.
Excuse me, Glenn, if, I know you live across the street
I was
from
gonna
me.
say, we know you're Joe's neighbor,
But-
and we know you Huckleberry.
On Huckleberry Hill
Just
Lane.
state your name and address for the record.
I'm sorry, Glenn Van Gurdon for Huckleberry Hill Lane.
Perfect.
I think that the point that Joe just made is an important point, and that is the frequency of overrides. Because I think the public needs to understand that you can't run a town like Hingham with never having an override. It's just not possible. So the question is, all right, if you're going to have overrides, what's the appropriate frequency that you should have it? You know, we've now gone 14 years without an override. And we can't wait another 14 years for the next override. So I think the point you made of every 4 to 5 years is an important point to make. That is good management rather than bad management. Having an override is not a sign of bad management. It's a sign that you're being stewards and you're being responsible, but you're not doing it every year or every other year, you're doing it with some frequency. The second thing is that the numbers, 6.2 million, 90 positions being eliminated, these are big numbers. And people react to big numbers. But what's really important is what the tax impact is. And Michelle knows this, I heard from Erin that the median tax bill for this year is about $9,000. The balance tax bill for next year will be higher than $9,000. That's just the way things work, right? The question is, what will the median go up with a balance, and what will the median go up for the level services override? And what's the difference between that? So if I'm thinking, oh, I'll make up a number, $400, $500, in order to save 90 jobs, and save the level of services that we currently have, it's a no-brainer. And so people, the numbers get much smaller when you start talking about tax impact. So we know what the median is. I think it would be very helpful to the town's conversation to include tax impact into that, in addition to 6.2 million, big number.
That's right.
90 people, big number. Because the tax impact, my guess is going to be less than $1,000 for the median. And those are my points.
Glenn, thank you very much. Excellent points, as always. I see, Michelle, you had your hand up. You want to say anything?
Thank you. Yes, I was up and down, but I just want to say thank you very much for the presentation. It was really, really informative, and I hope folks will watch it online, appreciate all the information that you put out on the website as well. I know this is a really challenging year, and Bill, to your point, I think the only way through this is together, right? So, you know, the school department and the school committee are committed to working with the town side and with AdCom and the select board to come up with the best budget we can overseer and good stewards, both financially, but also making sure that we are meeting the needs of the students that we are charged with advocating for. But appreciate all the work going into this.
Michelle, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Again, you can just raise your hand virtually or just kind of wave at us. All right, I'm not seeing anyone else. Okay, just my last comments are that, this board will continue, as we did last year and as we're doing this year, to come up with some creative ideas to generate revenue other than property tax increases. We're gonna continue to do that. I feel like we have an obligation to do that, and we already have a warrant article that speaks to that this year. And as my colleagues mentioned, we're gonna be talking about this topic now for the next couple weeks. So we encourage people to give us your feedback, your input. I had a conversation with a resident this morning, actually, that was very helpful. Participate in meetings. You can email us. If you don't want to talk at a public meeting, that's fine. We do read everything, and please stay engaged. Please stay active, and that will help us make the best decision for the town. So thank you. With that, we're going to move on to the next item. Agenda item 9 is going to be tabled to next week. It brings us to appointments. Don't believe we have any appointments this evening, is that correct? All right, then we're going to move on to public comment. Do any members of the public have any comment this evening under our public comment agenda item? Seeing none, we return to Town Administrator Select Board reports, and let's start with Art.
Nothing to add this evening.
Michelle?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Tom?
I'll just note that, and I don't want to steal your thunder, Mr. Chairman, unless you wanted to do this, but Bill joined us this week in a rating call for our ban issuance, which will be $83 million, which will be the initial funding for the 2 projects, for the Foster Elementary School and the Public Safety Facility. The rating call did not result in a rating because, like he said, there's a team that votes on that, but his opinion was that we were in a very strong position, and I certainly look forward to the highest possible rating, as we always get.
And I would just add to that briefly, that was my first rating call I've been involved with. And throughout the conversation, the individual that we were speaking with, who ultimately sets our rates, mentioned at least twice that the town's AAA bond rating is a significant factor they use in determining the rates of the band. So
That's right.
that is a bond rating that 3 of us inherited, but the previous boards that got us to that bond rating have maintained it. It proves when we have capital projects and borrowing this size.
Right.
But he mentioned that at least 2 or 3 times during the call, and I thought that was something I wanted to bring up to thank everybody who got us there. All right, Joe.
Just compliment the presenters this evening. It was really extremely helpful. Learned a lot about property tax, and just reminding all our residents that your next property tax is due tomorrow, February 1st, and that the next day, February 2nd, is Groundhog Day, hoping that we do not have an extended winter. That's all. Thank you.
Liz.
Nothing to report, thank you.
I just have one other thing, too. I went, recently I attended a memorial service for Peter Hall. For those who don't know Pete, he was the founder of the Hingham Militia. He was a captain emeritus, and he unfortunately recently passed away. But during the memorial service for him, somebody mentioned, actually it was Gary Tondorf, Dick mentioned that Pete was a tremendous student of our town's history. And that's really what motivated him to form the militia and to be so involved with our community. But I want to note that, with Pete's passing, the student of our town's history became part of our history. So my thoughts tonight are with Pete and Pete's family. So with that, I would take a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, Joe?
Aye.
Liz?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. We are adjourned.